Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're going to be doing a Q&A on competition shooting, which has nothing to do with this gorgeous landscape behind me. I just happened to be up in the mountains visiting some family and figured we'd take some time and record this month's Q&A. So, the questions we have today, by the way, all come from the fantastic folks over on Patreon. If you would like to submit one of your questions to the next month's Q&A, I request questions on Patreon, usually early, mid of the month, and so sign up over there, and you can join in for next month's. All right, it's a little chilly out here today, and also a little windy and a little snowy, but let's dive right in. Our first question comes from Guido, who said, with some oddballs like the 357 Cop Derringer, the Linda old designs like the Ross Steyr, do you have any firearms you'd love to bring to a match but haven't yet? Well, yes, I do. I'm going to just refer to the backup gun match here because that's all the stuff that Guido mentioned. There are two in particular that I am looking forward to using. One may happen, one will happen, one may or may not. The one that I'm looking forward to that definitely will is the BioFire pistol. The Smart Gun, I had a chance a little over a year ago to do some shooting with one at BioFire's headquarters in Colorado. It was neat. I think it's really interesting technology. I kind of like the way that they've worked on building it, but I really want to get one in my own hands under completely my own control and take it to a match and do some other abusive things to it and see how it can perform. So I'm looking forward to that, and I know it'll happen. I don't know exactly when, but it's coming. The one that I'd love to do that may or may not happen is the Girodoni. This is the very historical Austrian air gun. It was developed for the Austrian army, and it's probably most famous for being carried, one of them was carried by the Lewis and Clark expedition in the US. It's a 200-year-old, quite powerful air gun, 20-shot capacity, easy and fast to cycle, and it's not quite enough to take to something like a two-gun match, but it would be fantastic to try out at a bug match. Now, I'm never going to shoot an original one in a match, but there have been a couple reproductions made, and I'm hoping at some point I can get my hands on one of those reproductions to take to a match, because I think that'd be really fun content, really interesting historically, and a lot of fun to do. Our next question comes from Reich's Beer Minister, who said, what is or was the historical loadout with the highest value or highest historical value that you took to a match? The answer there is a video that you have not even seen. It would be a MAP 49 submachine gun. That's the most, as far as I can tell, I went back and did some checking. I think that's the most expensive / valuable gun that I've ever actually taken to a match. And it performed terribly. I took it to a PCC match, a pistol caliber carbine match, that really was designed for semi-auto carbines, and full auto not only doesn't help, it really hinders your efforts. And I did horribly at that match. This also happened right at that transition point when YouTube was starting to really crack down on full auto footage. So I wouldn't be able to post the video anyway, but frankly, the match went so badly for me that it wasn't really even entertaining footage to watch. So I never did make a video out of that. We'll probably, I'm gonna see if I can roll a little bit of the usable footage from that into a video about machine guns in competition that will be coming shortly. So you'll see a little bit of that. Next up, we have a question that I got from at least 3 different people. Davis, Gary, and ACC all asked basically, are there any historical firearms you brought to a match thinking they would be great that actually performed terribly, or anything that you brought as a joke because it was so bad that turned out to perform really well? So, sort of. There have been a couple of guns that I brought, well, one in particular I brought that I thought would do poorly that actually did pretty well, and that was a little Car 15 with a ring sight. And it's not so much the gun I thought would be an issue as the optic. So the ring sight is essentially, it's the optic that's in the original FNP 90. It is it's an unpowered, etched reticle, I think, tiny, tiny little non-magnified reflex sight. And it's a really neat idea. The whole thing is about this long and about this tall. It's tiny. It fits like inside the carry handle of an AR. And I got my hands on one and figured, what the heck, let's give it a try. How bad could it be? Expecting it to be pretty bad. And I actually did really well with it, which was pretty cool. It was hard to use, but I was able to do pretty well with it. probably the closest thing I have to one that well, the other that kind of falls into this same question would be the high point yeet cannon, which I brought kind of as a joke. In fact, I've actually done high points twice. I did one with 10mm high points, and I did one with a yeet cannon, and I did reasonably well both times. It turns out for a backup gun match, if the gun's reliable and it has sights and it shoots to point of aim, I'm gonna do pretty well with it. The places where I have trouble with the bug matches are when I don't have enough ammunition to complete a stage. Some of the bug match stages are longer than others, and I can't predict exactly what I'll always need. Or if the gun has malfunctions, or if it just doesn't shoot to point of aim, or I don't know exactly where it's shooting. That's when it gets problems. In general, bug matches, two-gun matches, brutality matches, I can usually predict pretty accurately how badly a firearm is going to handicap me. It's not necessarily how well I'm going to do overall, because that can, of course, be influenced by things that happen on that day and stage design and the other competitors there, but I pretty much know the guns that if I'm going to take it, if it's going to do fairly well for me or if it's really going to cripple me. Usually the crippling guns are the manually operated ones. If you take a bolt action or a lever action, you're going to do terribly with it. Because everyone's competing with a semi-auto, and it's a competition designed for semi-autos. When I take historical semi-auto rifles, they usually do okay. I can predict the ones like a Moss 4956 is not going to do terribly well because I'm limited to kind of clunky 10-round magazines. Something like a Sturmgewehr, if it runs well, I'm going to do pretty well because it's light recoiling, large capacity. The sights are good. So I don't normally get a lot of surprises for that sort of thing. Next up, Christopher says, what would be your unicorn gun combo for a brutality match? I really tried to come up with a good answer for this question, and I just can't. I have a lot of guns that I think would be interesting to take to brutality or two-gun matches, especially places where I can combine it's really fun to LARP brutality and two-gun matches when I have a uniform that's from the same time, place, and location, time and place, as the rifle and the pistol that I'm using. Those can be hard because historically, very few people actually carried both a rifle and a pistol. That's much more of a modern thing. So if you're trying to use original web gear, it can be really clunky to try and adapt original web gear to fit pistol holsters, which usually if you had a pistol holster, you weren't carrying a rifle, and so you didn't really have rifle ammunition pouches. There have been a number of things I thought would be fun to do along those lines, like East German. It'd be fun to get one of the Uyghur 940 clones, and then I don't know what the pistol would be, a P38 probably. Try that, but it has never happened. But there isn't really anything out there that's like a huge unicorn. I'd love to do this. I had some of those at first, and I've done them. I did a two-gun match with a FAMAS. I've done FG42. Yeah, nothing really jumps out. Sorry. Next up from Keith. Do you have a story about either yourself or someone else bringing a piece of new kit or period kit to a match where it failed miserably? Yes. I have an embarrassing match experience of my own exactly like that. I went to, was it the Berries Challenge? It's a USPSA, big, huge, multi-day USPSA match. I think I shot it all in one day, though. This was like 10 years ago plus. And I took an Inglis high power. And I thought it'd be really cool to shoot a stocked Browning high power as a PCC substitute. The problem was, little did I know it, my extractor was broken. And I didn't do enough due diligence on the gun before I left to find out. And when I got there, like every second to third shot failed to extract. And it was just a complete horrible dumpster fire of a match. And I had driven like 10 hours to get to this match. It was up in St. George, Utah. And I can't go back home and get a new extractor. The gun shop there doesn't have old-timey high-power extractors. There's just nothing to do. In theory, I could have borrowed someone else's gun to use, but I was filming this for a video, and so then I'd be out the video as well as everything else. And so I just went through it, ended up putting together some video that has an awful lot of of circus music in it. I'll include a link to that video in the description text. If you're interested, you can check that one out. But man, that is a perfect example of do your due diligence on your equipment before you go to a match, and you will avoid a lot of these sort of problems. You can't avoid all of them, but you can avoid 90% of them by checking everything out before the match. We'll get to a little more of the details on that later in one of our other questions. Alrighty, next is actually another question that I got from multiple people. So Stance and John and Loki all asked me a variation on the question of, what is the sequence of matches needed for a total beginner to advance to the level of brutality match? Or in general, how does a beginner get into two-gun competition? And I would say there are basically 3 steps of practice, not training so much, but there are 3 things that you need to do in order to be able to get into a brutality or a two-gun match. And the first one is basic safety. You need to know basic firearm safety and handling. And a really good way to do that is actually to go to other matches. Find just fun, relaxed, simple matches at your local range. And they don't have to be anything that you're hugely gung-ho into. What you want to do is find some competitions to get you an introduction to the idea of competition shooting. Because today, most shooting matches have essentially the same sort of safety protocols, safety rules, handling rules. And whether it's a .22 pistol match, or a rifle, long-range positional rifle match, or USPSA, or IDPA, or Steel Challenge, or Cowboy Action, they're all going to give you a really good basic understanding of the sort of safety handling understanding that you need to have. And just as they all use the same basic sets of handling and rules and such, so does two-gun, so does brutality. You want to get some time under your belt shooting, paying attention to things like especially 180-degree safety rules, and knowing exactly where your muzzle is. This is safety stuff, but when the timer goes off and when you're under stress and you have a mission, you have to hit those targets in this time and move to here, until you have a little bit of practice, it can be easy to lose track of the safety rules and sweep outside the 180 with a gun. So get a little bit of practice on that. Then, once you're ready to go to a cool match, number 1, zero your gun. Number 2, test your gun with the ammunition you're going to be using. And zeroing's huge. It's shocking to me how many people will show up at a competition that they've paid money to be in, and often a competition that they have traveled to be in, paid for, and not actually zeroed their rifle or their pistol or whatever gun they're using. So get out to the range. It's kind of boring, but you need to do it. Zero the gun. In a two-gun or a brutality match, you want to know where that rifle is hitting at basically the longest range that you're going to be shooting, which might only be 100 or 150 meters, or it might be 400, maybe even 500. But you'll know from the match what maximum engagement range is going to be. Make sure you know where the rifle hits out there. Make sure you know where it hits at basic intermediate ranges, the 75 to 150 meter range, and then make sure you know where it hits at close range, 7 to 15 yards. That's the range where if you have a modern combat rifle like an AR, like an AK, your sights are sitting up a couple inches above the barrel, and at very close range, your sight, the point of aim is actually significantly above the point of impact. And a lot of match directors will use this as an opportunity to try and catch people who don't know what their really close zero is. If you put a clay pigeon up at 7 yards, if you aim at the very center of it, most people are going to hit under it, and they're going to miss. So check your zero at close range, middle range, and long range. And then make sure that your mags work, make sure your ammo works. That should be pretty basic stuff. And like, it is really basic stuff, but there are still people who don't do it. They show up at a match, and nothing sucks more than, the timer goes off and you rack the gun to get the first round in, and it malfunctions because your magazine has a bent feed lip or a dented body or something that you could have prevented easily, but you didn't. So do those things, and then sign up for the match that you want to participate in. Don't worry about skill level. How good you are, where you're going to place, to my mind, totally irrelevant. You need to be safe, and you need to have fun, but don't try to get really good before you ever go to your first match so that you'll do well at the match. That's backwards, and it doesn't really work. you get good by going to matches. Once you've been to a couple of matches, you'll start to know, okay, what skills do I need to practice? What am I good at? What am I weak at? That sort of question. So yeah, once you're safe, once you have guns that work and you know they work and you know where they hit, go to a match, have fun, and from there, you'll know what you need to do to improve both your performance and your experience. All right, our next question is from Larry. Says, you guys seem to shoot some of the coolest old black powder stuff. Where on earth do you guys buy this great old iron? The answer is, most of those guns belong to my buddy Tom, and he buys most of them off Gunbroker. Like, Gunbroker's fees have gone up in the last couple of years, and they can be really obnoxious, but in my experience, Gunbroker is still the single best place to look for interesting, collectible, historical firearms. They have a huge market, a huge audience using Gunbroker, and so you can find all sorts of cool stuff. Sometimes it's going to end up overpriced, but it's an auction. You know, if you have a maximum price, put it in. If you lose, you know, you'll often probably lose a couple of auctions before you win whatever the gun is that you really want, unless you're willing to just blow it out with a lot of money, which sometimes some people are. Beyond that, I used to say gun shows. There are some places where gun shows are still really good. My hometown is not really one of them. I hardly find anything ever of interest at the local gun shows around me. Or else there are also a number of websites out there that have classified ad sections, and the ones that are more focused on older firearms can have some really interesting stuff come up for sale. It's not an auction, so you'll have to be quick on the ball and be the first person to spot it if it's something really neat and buy it. Anyway, Gunbroker would be my first recommendation. Tim says, what does your dry fire and live fire practice look like leading up to a major batch like Moon's Out? This is embarrassing because my practice regimen leading up to a major match is pathetically almost non-existent. Sadly, like, one of the downsides of doing the volume of video content that I do and the number of different guns that I work with is that pretty much all of my I don't really have recreational shooting time. Pretty much all of my shooting time is spent working on stuff for videos. So I'm shooting totally different stuff most of the time, and I just don't get that much chance to practice specifically with guns that I'm taking to competitions like Moon's Out or like Lynx Brutality or like Finnish Brutality. I will always make sure I take the time to check my ammo, check my magazines, and confirm or fix my zero with whatever optic I'm using. But honestly, that's pretty much the extent of my practice leading up to even really big matches like that. I don't expect to win. I'm thrilled if I can do reasonably well. I am going for the camaraderie and the fun experience. And to be honest, part of the reason I go is to make video content for you guys with cool stuff at cool places. The people who are there to compete to win, they're shooting a lot in practice, and they're clobbering me all the time, which is fine. Let's see. Cliche Guevara says, any thoughts on biathlon or modern pentathlon and how their guns and processes are adapted to their disciplines? Both are pretty fascinating, particularly pentathlon as a simulation of a soldier trapped behind enemy lines. Yeah, so these are two theoretically, like, originally military-styled Olympic events. Biathlon is shooting and skiing. Pentathlon is, if I remember right, it is fencing, pistol shooting, horse jumping, running, and I believe swimming. And both of these today, pentathlon today, the pistol shooting element is 10-meter air pistol, which, I mean, it's kind of killed the military spirit of it. But frankly, the fencing, Olympic fencing, has minimal military utility either. Modern pentathlon is, I think, fairly far removed from its original founding idea as military combat disciplines. It kind of is in name only. Biathlon has a really cool history that I actually wrote an article on this. I went back and checked. I wrote an article on this 11 years ago for the Firearm blog. I'll link to that in the description as well. When it was first introduced, it was actually military patrol in 1924, so actually over 100 years ago now. And it was a 4-man squad, an officer and 3 soldiers that would have to ski something like 30 kilometers, that's close to 20 miles, and engage rifle targets out to hundreds of meters with service rifles. And, you know, it was a team event, team score. really interesting. They did that once as an Olympic sport. They then did it a couple more times as a demonstration sport. And then in 1960, it went to modern biathlon, which is an individual sport, and it's essentially skiing a track. Today, it's a loop that you do multiple times. I don't remember if it always was, but it's skiing a loop and then shooting at targets, and then skiing and shooting and back and forth. When it was introduced in 1960, it was still full power rifles, center fire rifles, originally military rifles. By the mid-70s, a lot of guys were starting to use more competition-oriented guns, so like 6 and 6.5 millimeter rifles. 1978, biathlon transitioned to 22 rimfire. Today, it's 22 rimfire, and they have toggle action repeating rifles, where when the shooter's holding the rifle up, there is a toggle that's like thumb operated. It's extremely fast, extremely short throw, very easy, in order to cycle the rifle as fast as possible. One could be forgiven for thinking they had semi-auto rifles. They don't. They're manually operated, bolt action technically, but with a little toggle action on the side of the rifle. And they're shooting at ludicrously small targets. They do, the prone shooting is done 50 meters at a 1.8-inch target, and the standing shooting is done 50 meters at I think it's like a 4.5-inch target. No misses allowed, or well, no follow-up shots allowed. You get one shot on each target. If you miss, too bad, you miss. That's a really cool sport. I feel like biathlon is a little closer to its military roots today, partly because it's still at least gunpowder firing instead of just an air pistol. Don't get me wrong, air rifle and air pistol are extremely impressive sports. The championship level shooters with those guns are amazing, but it's a little bit of a different thing to full power rifle or pistol shooting. It's a different discipline. So personally, I'm more interested in the more military oriented stuff. So yeah, at some point I really need to do videos on at least one or maybe a couple different styles of modern biathlon rifle, because they're pretty cool. Next up, Nick says, there is a mortar competition at Big Bore Blast in Ohio this June. Do you regret not buying that live registered 50 millimeter French adorable mortar from Morphy's a year or two ago? Because I do. No, I really don't regret not buying a mortar. So the thing he's referring to is a little 1936 pattern French tiny. It's like I said there, it's adorable. It's a little mortar, packs up about this big. 50 millimeters, so it's a 2-inch mortar, uses a little bomb that at the time was the same essentially as the French issue rifle grenade. I actually bought one at a show that's deactivated, and so there's no restrictions on transfer. It's not a gun legally. And with those mortars, it's really not that much more expensive. In fact, sometimes you can actually find the live ones cheaper than the deactivated ones, because the live ones you have to get a tax stamp, and they're much more controlled because they're NFA items. But to me, there's just no good, easy way to shoot mortars recreationally. The guys who do it put a lot of time and effort into making it happen. Making it happen. Props to them. It's awesome. I did have a chance not that long ago to shoot a 1936 German light mortar, actually also a 50 millimeter light mortar, and that was fantastic. It was super fun, and it was possible only because the guy who had it had this significant stock of both original mortar bomb deactivated or inert mortar bombs and launching projectiles. If something like that were available for another mortar, I'd be a lot more interested, but I just don't have the time and bandwidth to deal with making a bunch of my own mortar ammunition just to play with. So the guys who do, though, man, it is super fun. All right. M. Welty says, assuming rules allow it, do you see any potential advantages to running a combo rifle in a match with many targets at a variety of ranges, including paper up close and spinners? My conceptualization of a combo rifle would be something like a 20-inch 308 with a 20-round mag combined with a 5.7 or similar, using high-cap mags like P90 mags. And he goes on to explain how exactly this would be used. My answer to this is no. Nobody. Just no. The gun would be heavier, and what sounds on paper like an advantage of specialized barrel and cartridge for different types of target, in reality, there's just not going to be that much difference in capability, and you would be better off for a match like this just using one, in my opinion, nice light 5.56 You don't really need 7.62 NATO or another heavy power cartridge for most of these matches. You're not shooting that far away, and they virtually never have any sort of terminal impact requirement. Like, you don't need a heavy hitting bullet. Light bullets like 5.56 work just fine as long as you can get them on the target. Up close, 5.56 is as close to recoilless as anything practically needs to be. At distance, it can be nice and accurate, and I don't see an advantage to trying to put together a combo gun for that sort of thing. Christian says, from shooting USPSA, I, like others, find myself walking through the stage and planning out reloads. Do you do the same? And does the buzzer also have the effect on you of completely ruining, like making you completely forget your stage plan? No. Well, anytime I go to a USPSA match, absolutely everybody does that. I don't really like it, if I'm going to be honest with you. What I really like about two-gun matches is that there is no advantage to perfectly planning out a stage. To me, it's more interesting when the stage has accuracy and physical challenges, and how well you do on the stage is just a matter of how well can you perform those tasks, of hitting those targets and performing whatever the activities are. If the competition is set up such that the exact right footwork and stages where you have to memorize where all the targets are because they're deliberately hiding targets, I just do not enjoy that sort of thing at all myself. I know a lot of people do, but not me. And matches where your precise footwork is a significant element on how well you're going to do, I'm not really that interested in that either. So I kind of make it a point to to aggressively not plan my stages out when I'm shooting USPSA matches, which isn't very often. I'm sure it's entirely coincidental that I also do very poorly in USPSA matches. There can't be any cause and effect there. All right, let's move on. Alexander says, with all the backup gun matches you have shot, has it changed your thoughts on what's a good versus bad carry gun? Or does training and proficiency outweigh individual differences in handguns? I would say, I think training and proficiency is absolutely more important than most of the details of a carry gun. As long as you meet a basic minimum of, basically, of reliability and accuracy. And pretty much all the gun, like most of the stuff on the market today meets those basic requirements. And frankly, a lot of older guns do too. Now, training and proficiency, I think there's a little more to it for carry than there is for competition. One thing I've noticed, when I do a backup gun match, it's always a different gun, as you've seen. And I usually, as I mentioned earlier in this Q&A, don't have a lot of time put in beforehand practicing with that particular gun. And by the fourth stage, I'm pretty well tuned in on the gun, and I'm shooting nicely and I'm efficient with it. But on the first stage, I will find myself often flubbing something. We don't generally draw from a holster, almost never draw from a holster at the bug match, but I will do something like forget the safety because it's on the other side of the gun, or just mishandle the gun in some way. And I think if you're going to carry a gun, what you really ought to do is practice a lot with that particular gun. And it's probably not a good idea to change out your carry gun on a regular basis. You want not just good proficiency at shooting, you want to be able to perform well with your carry gun immediately with no notice on the first try. It's easy to be good at shooting and be able to, get a couple draw strokes out, okay, now I'm ready, let's go. If you're carrying a gun, you don't get that opportunity if you have to actually use it. You want a gun where you can, I'm not going to say muscle memory, but you want to be able to pretty instinctively get the controls right, get your grip right, get the sights on target quickly, and make a precise shot with it. So what gun you're using, I don't think makes that much difference, but you need to be practicing with that gun to a significant degree. Cody says, do you think action challenge matches like Brutality will continue to grow in popularity? I certainly hope so. I think they're the most fun and the most interesting sort of matches out there, which is why they're my favorite to go to. I want to point out, Polinar Tactical in Slovenia, they have a goal of turning Brutality matches into something almost akin to like F1 racing. They are implementing live streaming, with commentary, like live commentary on the matches, multiple live camera angles running concurrently with a really awesome audiovisual crew running cameras and running an editing board and making this all come together at Lynx Brutality. They've done that. They've live streamed, I think, 2 years in a row. Last year they had live commentary going as well. I think it's really cool. I would love to see that expand. I think Brutality matches in particular have the potential to be a really good spectator sport. Like if people can get super into watching golf or watching NASCAR, Brutality, frankly, there's a lot more going on and it's really fun to watch. So I have high hopes. There are going to be a lot of challenges, a lot of obstacles in making that happen because this is firearms. There are, of course, safety issues for the matches, but there are also socio-political elements in having this become a mainstream spectator sport, as well as a more popular general mainstream sport. So I hope so. I really hope so. I'm going to do what I can to help make that happen. All right, our next question is from Landrick. Says, how do you decide what gun or guns to shoot at a competition? I have a limited time and money budget to attend competitions. A lot of the time I shoot different guns I would like to try on the clock. I'm not the sort of shooter that's going to win no matter what, so I like to shoot things that are interesting to me. How do you go about deciding? Not that far off from what you're doing, Landrick, except one of my primary considerations is what's going to be an interesting video. So I basically never shoot the same gun in competition twice because if I've filmed it once, I don't want to do another video of that same gun in competition again. I want to have something fresh and different each time. Beyond that, once I have a couple of things, well, once I have something in mind that I haven't shot before, then it becomes a question of, do I have all the infrastructure to shoot it? If it's a two-gun match, do I have the web gear that I'll need? Do I have a couple of magazines? Is the ammunition available? Because sometimes I'll have a gun that would be really cool to shoot in competition, but it uses some really weird oddball cartridge, 6.5 French long, that I just don't have enough to shoot a major match with, or I don't have enough magazines to shoot a match with. So to me, it comes down to guns that are going to look interesting. They don't have to look good. They just have to look interesting on camera, that I haven't used before, that I have all the stuff to shoot in a match. We've got two more here. This is a little bit of a short Q&A. Sorry about that, but I don't have a ton of questions this month, and I'm getting a little chilly out here. So Nick says, has anybody ever used a water-cooled machine gun in any of the competitions you've attended? If not, can you think of a suitable theoretical course of fire for those of us with first-generation belt-fed heavies? First half, nope. I have never seen a water-cooled belt-fed machine gun used in a competition, largely because they are completely unsuited to any of the normal competitions that are out there. Competitions typically involve dynamic movement, and water-cooled belt-fed heavies require tripods. And you're looking at like 100+ pounds of weight between the gun and the tripod. And these are also crew-served firearms. They can be shot by one guy, as I'm sure you know if you have one or several of them. But to run them properly, it requires a crew, especially to carry them around. A guy to carry the ammo, a guy to carry the gun, a guy to carry the tripod, maybe a couple more guys to carry spare ammo. I have from time to time tried to think about putting together a competition specifically for that sort of gun and how could we make it interesting and cool. And I've had some ideas, never really enough to put together a proper match, because like one of the things that belt-fed heavies are good for is psychological intimidation of an enemy, keeping people's heads down. Well, it's hard to score keeping people's heads down. How do you do that? Yeah, you can set up paper targets and have a whole horde of targets, and how many hits can you get total? Things like that I think are viable and would make for interesting stages. But one of the biggest things that has prevented me from ever really trying to follow through on this in a major way is that there's a Venn diagram of people who own belt-fed water-cooled machine guns and people who are interested in competition shooting. And there is not much overlap between those two groups, especially when you consider the geographic restrictions of everyone's got to be in the same spot on the same range to make a competition. If we're going to do this as, say, two-man teams, which is really kind of the bare minimum for it, we have 10 competing teams. That's 20 guys, 10 belt-fed machine guns, all in one range. There are going to be a limited number of places where you can do that, and a really limited number of places where there are enough people who have the guns and the motivation or interest in competition. So unfortunately, it's something I think would be fun, but it's never really been feasible enough to do for real. And our last question, this is kind of a short gimme, is from Joshua, who says, what has been the easiest historic gun for you to shoot left-handed in a competition setting? And the answer is virtually all of them. There is a lot of talk out there that I've seen about having to, like, how do you accommodate for left-handed shooting in military firearms? And there's virtually no actual problem with shooting stuff left-handed. The place where there is bullpups. If a bullpup only ejects out one side, it's probably going to be a problem for left-handed shooting. Although not all of them. There are some that can be shot left-handed, you know, the right-handed gun that's ejecting like this by a left-hander. If you push the stock forward, kind of square up, put the gun more center in your chest, it's not really great, but it can be done. And then a lot of bullpups can be transitioned from left to right eject. And beyond that, virtually nothing causes problems. The only place I've ever had actual issues, and they were just issues of it being uncomfortable, are some early ARs. Like I had a chance to shoot a Portuguese AR-10, and it ejects at such a sharp angle coming backward that as a left-hander, cases would actually bounce off my cheek. And of course, if you are right-handed, that's not an issue because they go off past your shoulder. But that's it, and it doesn't make it impossible to shoot. It's just unpleasant and kind of awkward. And it can usually be fixed by tweaking extractor springs or buffer weight, something like that, because you don't really want the guns ejecting at that sharp of an angle anyway. So when it comes to things like bolt actions, in theory, you can have an awkward problem if you're shooting from something like an NRA high-power shooting sling, where your sling arm is basically tied solid into the gun. And if you're left-handed, then you have to do a weird reach over the top sort of thing to cycle it. But that's NRA high-power shooting, and most people are doing that with semi-auto rifles today anyway. So action matches really just isn't a problem, so which is good. It's nice for us left-handers that it could be a problem, but it's not. So that is the extent of our questions today. We'll be doing another one of these. This one came out a little bit late, so I'll probably be doing one of these at the very end of April. Like I said at the beginning, if you'd like to get your question in for next month, I don't know what the theme will be yet, but I will be soliciting questions on Patreon for that in the next couple of weeks. So head over to patreon.com/forgottenweapons. Sign up, help support Forgotten Weapons, and get your question into the next Q&A. Thanks for watching.